Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101. I am your host, Brian. Thank you for joining me today. Today are joined by Dr. Gabriela Haynes, who's been on this channel before, and we're going to be zeroing in on cladistics. I know that's something that everybody liked that we talked about before when we talked about the supposed evolution of dinosaurs to birds that are believed by evolutionists. And me and Dr. Gabriela Haynes had a wonderful discussion on that. And so now I've got her back, and we're going to be zeroing in on cladistics. And the point of zeroing in on cladistics here is because of the in the Are We Apes series is simply because in the case of cladistics, defining, reclassifying the impacts that people are using this to justify calling humans apes, calling birds dinosaurs, and I think this kind of understanding of why they're doing this and how they're classifying this and redefining these terms and blurring the lines between what is meaningful in a conversation in any act of communication when these words are being redefined as something else beyond their natural definition, and that's important because a lot of evolutionists will say that we didn't. Sometimes they'll even word it this way: we didn't evolve from apes; we are apes. So we. It's weird, but they don't. They think that we are apes, and they'll point to things that they think are similarities. But in reality, as Dr. Haynes will say in this video, those similarities are trying to tell a story of their supposed evolutionary history. So it's not similarities in the same sense that we would think of similarities, whether it's similarities connected to what they think is our presupposed common ancestry, what they think that we evolved from ultimately. I do want to point out before we get to there that because Dr. Haynes is a paleontologist, she's not a ape geneticist, she's not a biologist. She's a paleontologist, and most of her focus has been on the supposed bird evolution that's believed by evolutionists. So we're going to kind of focus on that as far as the examples. We will talk about a little bit about them classifying humans as apes too, but just we're going to be able to focus on the whole bird to dinosaur a lot because that is her area of expertise and what she knows a lot about. But in terms of cladistics, this video does a really good job of going into depth into cladistics and showing how they're redefining and reclassifying these things, as well as with the problems with cladistics. And so we zero in on that, and we have a much more in-depth discussion. Dr. Haynes is feeling much better from her illness, so she's a lot better now. And she ended up, I guess, because I was patient and everything, and she ended up giving us an extra 30 minutes of her time. And I think that I really appreciate that she did that for us. And so now we got an hour worth of discussion on the subject matter. And so without further ado, let's dive in.
Hello, my gentle and, of course, very modern apes.
Here, I'd like to kiss you goodbye.
All right, but you're so ugly.
Human beings are not just related to apes, but actually are.
This is a primate. And so is this. And so is this. And so is this. Hey, that's me.
We are still hominids. We're still primates, mammals, tetrapod.
and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm here today with Dr. Gabriela Haynes, a paleontologist from Answers in Genesis. You doing okay, Dr. Haynes? We've had you on here before, haven't we?
Yes, I'm doing good. Yeah, I was a little bit sick. Not only me, but the whole family. So last week, that's why we couldn't get to do that last week.
Yeah, you had a throat issue, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. It's still not 100%, but it's getting better. It's getting there.
All right, I'm glad. I really am. All right, I'm gonna read off your bio from Answers in Genesis. I know you've been over here before, but you never know if someone comes on here and they don't know who you are or what your background is. All right. According to the Answers in Genesis bio, it says Dr. Gabriela Haynes earned a PhD in geology slash paleontology from the Federal University of Ceará State in Brazil. Is that right?
Sarah,
Okay. I knew I was going to butcher it.
it's okay.
South America in conjunction with the University of Kentucky. She serves in the research department at Answers in Genesis AIG and collaborates in the AIG International Outreach Ministry as a translator and reviewer of the Portuguese language. All right. You want to go ahead and start the discussion part? We can go ahead and, because I know you have a lecture to get to
Yes,
at
sir.
11:30 your time. All right. Um, the first thing I want to ask, I know that you covered cladistics pretty well. By the way, our last interview went really well. There was a
Good.
lot of positive feedback. I think everyone liked the discussion on cladistics and how they're redefining these terms the
Mm-hmm.
best. And I think it's because it was really, really helpful to people. You know what I'm
I'm
saying?
glad.
So because we as creationists, we're going to be speaking to evolutionists a lot, and we need to know how we're addressing this when we're talking to them because we may not actually mean the same thing. So
Yeah.
I know that we covered cladistics, but as a kind of a basic warmer up question, could you explain what is the technique of cladistics? What exactly is that?
So cladistics, it's a new way of classifying organisms, and it's based on the similarities of these organisms. And I'll come back to the similarities, to the word similarities in a little bit, okay? And it's grouping them based on ancestry. So I'm going to go back to the word similarity that I used. So you can say, "Oh, but so what's the problem? What's the difference?" Because if it's similarities, that's okay. Everybody use similarity to group organism, that's fine. The point is, because of evolutionary ideas, influences, the way that they see similarities is what is similar to them is what tells the story of the evolution of the animal. So which features I can see in the animal, which one of them I can see in the animal that is telling me the story of the animal evolution. Okay, so that's one of the biggest problem that has happened. The way that we do taxonomy is totally different from the way that we used to do. And this has been kind of going on since 1950s. And if you go back to some of the papers, there's a journal, a scientific journal that you can go online and check. It's from 1985, the year that I was born. And you go back and they're talking about cladistics. The name of the journal is Cladistics. And you go back and you're going to see the first articles that they published. And they're talking about how cladistics, it's rooted in evolution. And how evolution, that's amazing. One of my papers, I list some of those things. And how evolution is not a theory neutral. It's not neutral at all. Okay. So it's very important for us to understand that we are doing taxonomy differently. We are seeing, when I say we, is this the scientific community, okay? I'm not going to put myself in that because that's not how I see it. Okay, so let me just reword that. they are seeing taxonomy differently. They are doing taxonomy differently. They are seeing similarities differently. They are grouping differently. They are using words differently. So everything is different. That's the first thing that I want to lay down right here. So when you're talking to someone about taxonomy, about organism, about similarity, be careful, because you might be thinking that you're talking about the same thing, but you are not.
That's right. So you would say that this is cladistics is based on their presuppositions of common ancestry. So in other words, it's not that they're actually related, but rather that they think that they're related or that they
That's
share a common ancestry. And
That's
so
correct.
they're being redefined and reclassified. And this is impacting the Linnaeus classification system. Is cladistics, though? That's one thing I wasn't sure about. Is cladistics separate from the Linnaeus classification system, or is it part of Linnaeus classification system, or is it being somehow the lens in which these things are being looked through or something? Exactly how is cladistics in relative to the Linnaeus classification system there?
In no
Exactly.
way. In no way. So there was a way. When I was in school, just undergrad school, there was a book on evolution that we had to study, because some people might think, well, she's creationist because she never studied evolution. And just for you all to have an idea, I study in Brazil. I am from Brazil. So most of the universities in the whole country, they are secular universities. I went to a public college, university, a public university, and they're very secular. Okay, they're very secular. So the books that I was studying, it was just secular books. I was taking evolution classes, and that's fine. So one of those books was talking about the difference between linear classification and cladistics. What happened was, before cladistics, we had a way of grouping things based also on similarities, okay? But after cladistics, those similarities are related to ancestry. Okay, so it's not about being similar. It's about a similarity that tells the story of the evolution of the group. So now they're just not seeing similarity the way that we used to see. They're seeing similarity based on ancestry, on what kind of similarities they share with the group that they came from, or the group that they branched from. Okay.
So in case of humans and apes, they would see similarities between humans and apes, and then determine that humans had evolved from apes on the basis of those similarities. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. So as you see, it's a circular reasoning. They use evolution to prove evolution.
Right. Definitely, absolutely. Um, all right. And so you would say cladistics does apply to the whole
The
them.
whole thing, the whole thing. It's different. The taxonomy system after 1950 changed completely, completely. The meanings, the terms, the method, the way that they see the data, everything is different. And I'm pointing that out, and I'm kind of insisting on that point, because I get a lot of questions. I get a lot of information, and say, like, what about taxonomy? But but the similarities, like, that's all good, but you are not realizing that all of them have changed. All of them has changed. So we are not talking about the same thing at all. We're talking about different things, and people don't realize that. And I understand that, because unless that you are involved and deep in this research, you're not going to see that, because of course they don't tell you the difference. But there was a paper that was written in 1986 that has just changed completely the way that you see birds and dinosaurs, for example, based on cladistics. The same they use with apes, in humans. So it's just everywhere. Every organism has been applied the type of classification now.
So when they call, like if they call a bird a dinosaur, they'll say that's a dinosaur, or that they call humans apes, or bird a theropod dinosaur, whatever the case may be. It basically comes back down to cladistics. It's where they look at those similarities and then say that therefore they are related to each other.
That
Like,
is true.
theropod dinosaurs have hollow bones, birds do too, and that sort of
Hmm.
thing. I
Yeah,
saw a presentation that you had given about birds, and you mentioned that there were three criteria to be a bird. I think it was like a shorter tail, the folding of the wings. I can't
yeah,
remember.
swivel. Yeah, swivel hand. Yeah,
Swivel hand. And dinosaurs had the longer tail, and that sort of,
muscular. Mhm.
yeah.
And
And
feathers.
right, right, right. Um, and well, see. And you do see this as circular, right? You see this
Yes,
as
totally circular. Yeah, it's a circular reasoning. It's based on that. It's based on evolution to prove evolution.
right. All right. Um, could you tell me what you mean by this following statement? I got this from your paper, your peer review paper, and you said in the evolutionary worldview, the main characteristics used for classification are those that allow a path of evolution of certain groups to be revealed. Therefore, the observed features that end up being used in phylogenetic analysis are those that provide some adaptations in the creatures and changes due to new adversities. For taxonomy, this is an important point because it implies that a supposed adversity uh, can be understood as introducing new function and purpose.
Yeah,
Do, what do
sorry.
you?
Well, is what we were discussing. It's now the similarities that they see in the groups. Um, it's an interpretation of that those similarities, those traits, those features, they are allowing the evolution of the group through adaptation. So they're just mixing so many things there, right? There's interpretation, there's the idea of the evolution of one kind to a different kind. Is this idea that adaptation is also evolution, but adaptation is not evolution, it's just a change, okay? So that's also a logical fallacy right there of just using kind of the same term, but meaning different things. That's a logical fallacy. So that's something that we have to be aware.
You mean the equivocation?
Yes, correct.
All right. Just wanted to clarify that in case someone asks,
Hmm.
like, what logical fallacy was she talking about?
Okay.
All right. I have another question. You mentioned in your paper also that this is a very subjective approach. And in what way do you think that this is subjective? And I think you even used the word arbitrary as well.
Yeah. Um, there's a paper that I wrote that is a response to a reply of my paper. So I wrote a paper, a group of 5 people replied to my paper, and then I did a response to my paper, to the paper that they wrote about my paper. And in this paper, the third one in this chain, I have, I think it's around 20 pages of information from secular literature saying how subjective and arbitrary they are. Okay, so this group, they have some assumptions, they have a way of seeing the similarities, they're going to interpret the data, and they're going to group the data in one way. There's also this other group that sees the similarities in a different way, that has a different data set, that interpret the data set in a different way. And they're gonna put this information in one software that it was built with evolutionary assumptions, and they're going to run the data. And one thing that you can think is, but what about the data? Is the data good? Not good, because the data is also based on an evolutionary way of seeing similarities and an evolutionary way of interpreting those similarities. And depending on the data, you might not have enough data, enough information. We're talking about fossil. We're talking about pieces of bones. Okay? We're talking about bones that sometimes they're not found connected. They're disarticulated. You're talking about bones that sometimes are found in different layers, in different places. There's one, for example, Deinonychus was, the material was found around 35, I think it was 35 miles away, this material. They put them all together, okay? They put them all together. Different layers. They
Would
put
you
them
say
all
that,
together.
would you say that it could be possible that it could be more than one that they're putting together?
Well, I would interpret that as you just putting a lot of bones together. It could be the same species. It could be, but it could have some other stuff inside of it, right? Because that's the reality of things. We're talking about fossil. So we need to understand, I'm a paleontologist. We need to understand that even though I would love to have a fossil and be like, this is amazing, this is complete, this is all I need, I can get a lot of information from a fossil, but it's not the reality of things. It's not, okay? So they're gonna get this data from the material that it's already very hard to understand, to interpret.
So you
And
would
they're
say
gonna
this,
see this, huh?
I was gonna say, do you see this as highly interpreted then? So
Totally. Extremely. And I would talk to the people that's going to be watching this video. Go to my paper. Just read the whole thing, please. Read the whole thing. Don't only read what I wrote. Please read what they wrote and the questions they raised and how I answer them. And go to this 20 pages, the appendix, that it's around 20 pages of examples of arbitrary thought, subjective thought, inconsistent thoughts, problematic thoughts in when they're talking, when they're working with the data. So it's very important for us to understand that the world that we live right now, the information that we're getting, it's very, very confused. And you have to go down to the foundation. You have to go down and see, hey, how are they doing that? When you get any result, how did they get to those results? What is the method that they're using? What is the data that they're using? Is the data good? Is the data biased? You have to do that. Because if you just receive the data and you take it as it's good, I'm just going to use it, it's problematic. It's extremely problematic.
in your original paper, you when you were talking about Archaeopteryx, you were talking about different various views that they exist out there. Even evolutionists themselves don't seem to agree on
Mhm.
what Archaeopteryx is, and so it shows these. I believe you were showing that to demonstrate the subjectiveness of this particular approach.
Yeah, and one of the example that I give in my paper is that Archaeopteryx has been always seen as a bird. Okay, since Richard Owen kind of identified and published as a bird. But then it has been changed to a dinosaur, and then has been this bird or dinosaur. And in 2019, they did some research with cladistics. They ran some data, and they said, no, Archaeopteryx is a dinosaur. Okay? Couple months after, another paper is published by another group with a different perspective. And I urge you, if you want, read those two papers, and you're going to see right away that they're using two different methods. Okay. And they say, no, Archaeopteryx is a bird. So they're using cladistics, but they cannot agree with the result. Why? Because it's subjective, because there's arbitrary decisions being made. That's why they cannot agree with it. Because you're not talking about, oh, it's a bird, but it's a different type of bird. Or it's a dinosaur, but a different type of dinosaur. No, they're talking to, it's a not only different, but complete opposite group.
Right. And their evidence is not changing. It's their interpretations that's changing.
The data, the evidence, the data, the information, the fact, the bounds are just the same. They're the same. But the way that they're interpreting is different. So it could just, that type of situation where papers are publishing things with different, but only different, but also opposite results.
Right. My next question, I'm gonna read this as I put it in there. It says, you had mentioned this, that some creationists have tried to use cladistics in their own attempt at phenomenology. I'm talking about your paper again. I've seen theistic evolutionists do this very thing, whereby they try to place two different distinct kinds and redefine them under the same category of created kinds, such as claiming the birds are theropod dinosaurs. In your paper, you also mentioned that some YACs have tried to do this as well. I think you mentioned like Wood, Ross, McLean, and so forth. In reference to baraminology, what is your response to their analysis? Do you see this as a reliant on a method that is hopelessly circular and biased in favor of evolutionary presuppositions, where this might present one with challenges and can be insufficient, lacking, misinterpret, misidentify, or misrepresented? That last one's a quote from your paper.
Okay, yeah. McLean, Dr. McLean, Dr. Matthew McLean, and some others, they were the one that responded to my paper, the one that I wrote on Archaeopteryx. And I, of course, here, I'm not going to be able to talk about all of the details because, you know, it's a short video. So I urge people to go to the papers and read the papers and check what they said, what they questioned, and how I answered those. But I understand that once you use a data set that comes from secular resource, okay, it comes from a secular source. When you use this data, you have to understand that this data come not raw, not neutral. This data come from people that have evolutionary ideas backing them up. So that's the first thing. So if you realize that this data has assumptions, now you're going to have to check the data to see which assumptions they are applying to. Can they do that? Can this be done? And that's the problem. You don't know, okay? For example, one of the data sets that we have been working through and checking, it was calling a feather, a filament. They were calling a filament a feather. So in the fossil, they see a filament. But because they believe, based on evolutionary ideas, that this filament is the first stage to a feather to be evolved, okay? When they go to the data, they see the filament, and then they say, oh, they put a code as it has feather. So you go to the data set, they're gonna see, oh, this thing has feather. You go to the original paper, you read the paper, there is no feather, there is filament. But because of the evolutionary influence and their assumptions based on evolutionary ideas, they see So that's one of the points that we have to be aware, that the data set has problems, has assumptions. The software that they use also has problems. So we all know that simulation, that softwares, they're only good based on what you do, that based on what you put in. What you put in, you're gonna get out. Okay. So that's one of the problems also.
Do you see cladistics as something that shifts the meaning, definitions, and reclassification of terms so much that it renders the term meaningless? I think you did talk about that in your paper. When applied to the actual category or to our modern classification system. In other words, if someone is using cladistics to redefine what a feather is, and it becomes like something different other than what is naturally understood as a feather, or what is naturally understood as a bird, or what is naturally understood as a ape or a human, and they're redefining these terms in such a way, do you see them as rendering the term meaningless, like it's losing its meaning definitionally?
Completely. And this battle we have seen also in a secular camp, about the word woman, about the word conception, about the word life, about the word man. So we have seen the same thing. It's a battle uh, of the words, of the terms, of the meanings. And that's interesting because I have gotten a lot of comments like, so what does the word dinosaur mean? Maybe it doesn't mean what we think it means. What about bird? Does the word bird means bird? And it makes me think about that none of these type of questioning exist a couple decades ago. None of them. You would talk to someone and say, hey, I found a feather in my yard. Nobody would be like, what is a feather? Okay. And then I just see that it's the same type of questioning about the word day in the Bible, in Genesis. Was never a problem. Everything was fine. Everything was understood how it was read. But because of evolutionary ideas, now it's like, no. The word day, it's not actually day. It has a different meaning. We cannot understand it that way. We have to interpret it in a different way. And it's just funny to see because normally when people come to those comments, they only bring those questionings about dinosaurs and birds. I never saw anyone saying, but what about this group? Maybe we have to interpret in a different way. Maybe we have to see it in a different way because of this and that. No, it's most of the time it's birds and dinosaurs. And I wonder why. So I see that what's happening, it's a battle of words, of terms, of meanings.
Sorry to interrupt the flow of the conversation between me and Dr. Haynes, but I think this point here is very interesting because I decided to name this episode a game of semantics a long time ago, even before when I first perceived the episode, before I got Dr. Haynes to agree to come on here to have that discussion with me. But and I think this is kind of interesting because a lot of evolutionists will like to accuse creationists of strawmanning their position, misrepresenting their position. They'll say things like, "Oh, well, we don't think that 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 apes turned into people, or that birds or dinosaurs turned into birds. We think that they are birds or that they are apes, and uh, but essentially what they're doing is they're twisting the way they define these terms, and redefining them. Think of this example. I thought of this example when I was playing the video back and doing the editing. But imagine if you wanted to prove that you could turn lead into gold, but you redefine the term lead to mean gold and the word gold to mean lead. Then you no longer have to prove that you're turning lead into gold because lead is already gold and gold is already lead. So it doesn't matter. You just redefine your terms and you blur the line of distinction between the two. And as a result, you no longer have to prove that you can turn lead into gold because as far as your interpretation is, you already think it is gold or the gold is lead. So you can claim that both are the same thing when in reality they're not. They're distinct from each other. And this situation is a lot like that. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I've talked with a lot of evolutionists, and a lot of evolutionists tend to accuse YCs of strawmanning the position because, or not understanding evolution they because they recognize, or the evolutionists will claim that they are those things and or part of that same category, and they will blur the line between those two categories. And this confuses a lot of people because how does a YAC, how does a young earth creationist talk about this with an evolutionist without the evolutionists accusing them of misrepresenting their position? When in reality, it is their position that is got the confusing language in it that breaks down the communication between evolutionists and creationists. And that's an interesting point. And I think that Dr. Haynes does a really good job of discussing why that's an issue.
Of bringing up this idea of meaningless, as you just mentioned. And that's very, very problematic. It's very, it worries me a lot because when you lose the meaning of words in science, so what kind of conversation we're gonna have when we read a paper? Okay, sometimes we don't have the option to talk to the scientists. We read their paper. But if they're writing something, meaning something else, how am I supposed to know?
In other words, what you're saying is that all conversation would break down, or communication, not conversation, but communication
Totally.
break
In
down.
any way, like in personal communication, in paper communication. So how are we going to discuss that? So because I have been involved with this type of material for a while, when I read a paper, I can tell what they mean by those words. But people that are not involved, immersed in this research and all those kind of stuff that I have been doing, they're just gonna read it as it is. But the people that wrote the paper, they're not meaning what they're saying. They might be talking about taxonomy. Hey, this is just taxonomy. Well, what do you mean by taxonomy? Because there was a change in taxonomy a couple decades ago.
And some people are that I've chatted with have brought that up, or I actually had someone not too long ago bring up a whole list of alleged bird found with dinosaurs, and I said, I bet you anything that they have filaments, and then you're interpreting that as a feather, and they never responded back to that. I mean, they responded back, but not with but from that point.
Just go back to the paper. There's actually one dinosaur that is named as in Mandarin. The meaning of the name that they put in this dinosaur is feathered. You go to the paper, there's no word feather there, just filament. Excuse me. So you have to go back to the paper and read the paper because the interpretation that they have is very different from the actually fossil.
Right. All right. See. Okay. Does cladistics use ambiguous terms? This is something else you brought up in your paper. Could you give some examples of this?
ambiguous, misleading words. Yes. The biggest one, it's I'm gonna give you two. The word dinosaur. If I talk to my kid about dinosaur, because of course he hasn't not been immersed with this idea of dinosaur being birds. If I ask him to point out what is a dinosaur, he's gonna point out reptiles. Okay. But because changes that has happened, especially in the 90s, 70s, 90s, they actually 72, 74, and 90s, 80s also. The word dinosaur does not mean a reptile. They included birds in dinosaur because of the evolutionary idea. So I can be talking about dinosaur as a reptile, and someone else can be talking about dinosaur as a group which has reptiles and birds together.
And I know that they also split it up like avian dinosaurs and non-avian dinosaurs.
Yes, that's all new terms that have come out to make them express this idea of what is a non-avian dinosaur? It's a dinosaur that is not an ave.
Which means
Well,
no wings or feathers or nothing, right?
yeah, but I mean, when I say it, just let's just listen to that. A dinosaur that is not a bird. Of course. It's just like this man, he's a married single man. What is that? Married single man. What does that mean? It doesn't have any meaning. So I'm saying that a dinosaur is not avian, a dinosaur that is not a bird. But why they're saying that? Because in the group of dinosaurs, they have birds and dinosaurs. They have right there.
It reminds me of that thing where evolutionists used to say humans and apes shared an ape-like ancestor, and I'm like, what in the world does ape-like mean exactly?
I mean, it made the communication extremely confusing, extremely confusing. And we know biblically that God is not a God of confusion.
Right.
It's not. So if there's something in science or wherever camp, field it is, that is bringing confusion of the words, of the meaning, of the application, we got to be aware. We have to be like, it has to kind of brings a red light on us to be like, hey, we have to try to understand this in a way here, because it's not working well. It's not adding anything. It's actually bringing confusion.
All right. Can you discuss specific theropod dinosaurs that are claimed to be feathered dinosaurs as they are classified by cladistics, other than ARCHAEOPTERYX? I know we spent a lot of time talking about ARCHAEOPTERYX, but do you have a few examples that you can pull out from memory that of dinosaurs that people say, oh, that's a feathered dinosaur. That's an example of a feathered dinosaur, and yet
Yeah. Well, Microraptor and Caudipteryx, they're also very famous. They call the theropod dinosaur, and they actually birds. This is what we have found out based on our research. They have complete, perfect, functional, complex feather structure, just like if you have a bird in your house, you're gonna see a feather. That's what they have. They have a swivel wrist that can fold the wing. They have all the structure of a bird. And if you go to read the paper, you're gonna see a lot of times them talking about, oh, this is bird-like. This is bird-like, bird-like, bird-like. That's just like here in the United States, you have it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, sound like, yeah, a duck, it's a duck. Well, when you go, and it's the same thing, for example, with Lucy, or just the genus where Lucy is part of. You go and compare some species and of this genus, you're gonna see ape-like, 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 ape-like. But it's not an ape. That's what they say, right? So you have to understand that there's a lot of features of bird in Microraptor and Caudipteryx, but because of cladistics, because of evolutionary ideas, they're pushing them to the camp of dinosaurs with feathers. And that's a big problem. That's what they say also about ARCHAEOPTERYX. That ARCHAEOPTERYX is a dinosaur with feathers and not a bird.
I remember one time there was a friend of mine who has a YouTube channel called Standing for Truth on he had like open mic nights a lot, and he would have critics on there too, and so critics would come on there and challenge us, and I was on there at one point, and one of the critics sat there and showed a picture of a fossil, and it had feathers on it, and I mean it was clearly a bird. You could tell it was a bird, and he said, "There's a bird. There's a dinosaur with
With
feathers,
feathers.
and a theropod dinosaur." And I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, that does not look like anything like a theropod dinosaur. A theropod dinosaur is like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus Rex, like what you see on Jurassic Park or something. Those are theropod dinosaurs. This is not a theropod dinosaur.
Well, the point is, I don't even like using these term theropod, because when they talk about theropod, they're talking now about birds and dinosaurs in the same group. So they're putting them together in the same group. There was a change in the word theropod. From 1881, it was one meaning. After 1986, basically a little bit over 100 years, theropod means a different thing. So theropod before, in 1881, was just dinosaurs, reptiles, period, okay? After 1986, over 100 years later, theropod, now it's a group that includes dinosaurs and birds together. So when they say, oh, this is a theropod, okay, what is the meaning? What is the definition of theropod that you're using? You have to ask.
It's ours. How
You
we're
have to ask.
understanding it's going to be different.
Yeah, because it's different. So that's why they're calling birds theropods, because in the group of theropods, they're putting birds and dinosaurs together.
So would you say then that certain claims of feathered dinosaurs are either dinosaurs with filaments or actual birds with feathers that they're calling theropod dinosaurs?
That's correct.
So that's basically how they are blurring those terms.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. All right. Do you see cladistics as unbiblical in its methodology? Like it's an unbiblical methodology.
It's very hard to use this term unbiblical, because I understand that different the comparison is different. The same way that Linnean, we cannot say that is biblical. Okay, we cannot say, oh, this is biblical and we have to stand with it. I like using that it's reliable, it's more reasonable to do. Why? When I talk about Linnean, okay? Why? I'm not saying that Linnea is perfect, okay? I'm not saying that Linnea is the only one that we should use. I'm not saying that Linnean it's biblical. I'm not saying that. That's one of the things that the group that responded to my paper brought up. And they said that I was saying that Linnea was biblical. And I said, I never mentioned that, because it's just different type of comparisons right there. But Linnea does not have the evolutionary bias behind it. Okay? And my point is to bring it up, the one that that has evolutionary ideas behind, which is cladistics. So I think that it's a different type of comparisons to say that it's biblical and unbiblical. So I like saying that cladistics is the one that has evolutionary worldview behind it. And that's all I can say about it.
All right. Um, all right. As a last question, just you speaking to the audience out there, when other Christians and creationists approach evolutionists using this method to reclassify and redefine terms like this, what would be your best approach for them to this situation as a way of responding to these cladistic objections and recategorizations by evolutionists? How would you,
Okay.
I mean, what would you be your best advice to everybody?
So it's important to point out to them that we have a worldview. Okay, that's the first thing. We have a worldview, so we're going to interpret things in a different way. The second point is to tell them that before cladistics, things were grouped in a different way. Organisms were grouped in a different way. The other point is to show that cladistic has evolutionary ideas. The other point is to not grant the terms they use.
A question came to my mind
Okay.
real quickly.
Sure.
Evolutionist brought this up. I brought up cladistics to him, and he said it's not cladistics; it's just similarities. And you mentioned something about similarities with cladistics. It. What do you think about that? The evolution.
Well, yeah, but it's again, they're using the same word, but they don't mean the same thing that we talking about. Similarities, I said that was the first question. Similarity, when they use those similarities, it's to tell the story of evolution of that group. So they're not just picking similarities, they're actually similarities. They're choosing, because they choose which feature they're going to compare. That's again subjective and arbitrary. So they're choosing those features. And they're choosing their choice. It's based on what is telling us the story of evolution of this group. So they're going to pick the similarities that tells them the story of evolution of that group.
I didn't
So
mean.
when they talk about, you're like, oh, it's just similarities. And then you have to say, what do you mean by similarity? What their similarities have behind them. You have to ask, and I will tell you, 99% of the people, they will not know that those similarities that they're using cladistics is the ones that tells the evolutionary story of the group. They will not know that. The only people that know about those details, if you read the papers, if you go back and read the papers from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s, then you will find that out. And I point that in my paper. And I have all the reference right there. So I urge people to go there and read the paper and understand that it's a battle of words and you have to be aware of them. Because if not, they're going to eat you up in a way that is totally not logical, because they're talking about the same terms that we think we are talking about, but with a different meaning.
Right.
So those are the approach that I was telling. Just don't grant their terms. Because I had someone approaching to me and said, a Christian, a creationist, and he said, what is the out group that you can compare birds? I looked at him and I said, why are you using this term, out group? This term, it's cladistics term. It's based on evolutionary ideas. Why are you using this word?
What do you say?
And he was surprised that I was asking him that, because he's so used to that terminology that he's just talking about. Or some of them say, but what about this clade? Like, why are you using this word?
I heard you use that word clade before too.
Yeah. we have to be careful because the way that we think has to be communicated by the way that we say words, right? So if we're talking about clade, if we're talking about outgroup, if we're talking about avian, non-avian dinosaurs, we're talking cladistics, okay? So we're talking cladistics, and that's how people will understand us. So I brought that up to him, and he was like, "Oh, no, okay, so let's not use this word outgroup." I said, "Okay," and then he said, "But what is the group that you can compare birds?" I said, "None."
Other birds?
Said none. He was like, "Oh, so you don't know?" I said, "No, it's not that I don't know, it's that there's none. Birds are birds. They have special features that make them bird. The same way that reptiles are reptiles, they have the same feature that group them as a reptile, and then they can bring up, oh, but what about this animal? Goodness, we have exceptions. That's fine, but the exception cannot over rule the main thing.
There's a law in logic called the law of identity, that A is A and not B. And
Yes,
basically, it's like this chair is a chair because it has all the defining characteristics of a chair, and it's not a couch because it don't have those defining characteristics that makes a couch a couch. But
that
once
is.
you start redefining what a chair is, and some
Mhm.
chair has, a couch looks exactly like a chair, it just kind
Yeah.
of makes the whole communication thing break down.
Completely hopeless because you cannot communicate anything. So do not grant their terms. Do not, because if you grant the terms, you bind their idea. So they need to understand that, hey, the wording that you're using is cladistics, and I don't grant that.
Awesome.
I don't.
I appreciate your help today. I promised you I'd get you out by the hour mark, and it's already about 3 or 4 minutes till.
Yeah,
So
thank you very much.
no problem. And we appreciate you very much. Thank you again. I've got like one other video to edit. I got to finish editing that to upload to YouTube, and then I'll edit this and upload this to YouTube. But thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time. And I'm glad you're feeling better. And I hope
Yeah. Mhm.
a good time at your next lecture.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Brian, for the invitation. I apologize for the inconvenience of trying to get a time to do this. But at least we got 30 more minutes, right? Than we were previously thinking. So thanks so much for your patience, for your kindness, dealing with all this crazy of the schedule and being sick. So you were very gracious towards me and the way that you handled the situation. So thank you so very much for that.
Sure,
So
no problem. And thank you for understanding my internet issues.
it's fine. It's totally fine. Yeah, we have that here too sometimes.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And talk to y'all later. Thank you.
Okay. God bless. Bye bye.
Well, this is it for Apologetics 101 on the subject of cladistics on a game of semantics, the part 2 of our We Apes series. So I really like this series so far. I really enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Haynes. The subject matter cladistics is something that I think will help Christians and YACs talk with evolutionists a lot better because the, 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 the redefining of these terms and the reclassification of these groups and how they're understanding things like similarities and feathers and feathered dinosaurs and theropod dinosaurs and birds and things like that, and they're just kind of reclassifying they're reframing the conversation, and what we mean by it is not what they mean by it. They'll say, yes, we got all kinds of examples of bird dinosaurs. Look at all these examples, and they're either full-fledged birds, they have all the characteristics to make them a bird. They're not a theropod dinosaur, or they're a dinosaur that they found filaments with, which are just hairs that they think evolved into two feathers, and so they're redefining that as uh, um, They're redefining that as feathers when they're not feathers, and so they're claiming it's a feathered dinosaur when it's not. And so that's interesting. Also, in the connection with the Are We Apes series, they're defining us as apes. They believe that what we share a common ancestry. Then they kind of cherry pick these similarities. They're like, well, yeah, but apes have hands, we have hands. you know, we walk upright. They think apes used to walk upright at one time, or at least in our alleged shared common ancestry. And so they just kind of redefine these terms and reclassify them, and how they're understanding them is very different from how we're understanding them. When we think of a feather, we know what a feather is. We find them in the yard sometimes. We see them on birds all the time. And so we know what a feather is. But what they're finding is not actually feathered dinosaurs. And, and apes and humans don't share a common ancestor. We don't. There are a lot of differences between humans and chimps, and apes, but that often gets ignored in favor of any kind of similarity whatsoever that they think that we share in common with each other. And so this doing this kind of reframed the conversation. I think one of the things that I noted was, like evolutionists will often sit there and accuse us of misrepresenting their position, when in reality we're not actually misrepresenting their position. Like they'll say, oh well, we don't really think that that something like an ape had turned into a human, or the humans evolved from an ape. We say that humans are apes, and birds are dinosaurs, and that's just a broader, dinosaurs is just a broader group that birds belong, and apes is just a broader group that humans belong, or primates, and that sort of thing. And in reality, that is cladistics. That is them redefining the conversation, redefining terms, redefining words, redefining the way in which these things are being argued. And they don't mean the same thing. And I agree with Dr. Haynes on everything she said in this discussion, how this would render it meaningless. We talked about the law of identity. So it's logically absurd. So in reality, young Earth creationists are not actually misrepresenting evolutionists. In fact, Charles Darwin actually believed that we actually evolved from apes, and that one group turned into another. It's just the invention of cladistics that bring people to thinking, oh well, no, we are the thing in which we evolved from, and like that's a broader classification in which we belong to. And so thinking that way tries to make them accuse us of misrepresenting the position, but in reality, we're not misrepresenting the position. They are arguing in a circle. They are making a circular argument. They are actually assuming their conclusion. And on top of that, it renders the entire conversation meaningless, because once you redefine these words, then a feather loses its meaning. A filament loses its meaning. Theropod dinosaur loses its meaning. Most people would understand a theropod dinosaur like those dinosaurs with the hollow bones, Velociraptor, T-Rex, things like that. And that's what they would understand as a theropod dinosaur. So when you say, oh, well, we find a theropod dinosaur, and you show this bird, and it looks exactly like a bird, feathers, has all of the fundamental characteristics that make a bird, then automatically, straight off the bat, we're thinking, okay, why in the world are you calling this a theropod dinosaur? It's not a theropod dinosaur. It is a bird. It is clearly a bird, and that sort of thing. So I hope y'all enjoyed this, because I think this discussion is very helpful for other young Earth creationists, because at the end of the day, we are going to be encountering and talking to and discussing these topics with evolutionists. And we have to understand, okay, the evolutionists have decided to redefine and conflate these categories, as if they're one and the same, and they don't mean the same things by them as we do. And of course, we should not adopt, as Dr. Haynes said there at the end, we should not adopt their cladistic terminology. We shouldn't use terms like outgroup and avian and non-avian dinosaurs and things like that, because that's just not the case. Those are cladistic terms. We should not adopt those. And we should understand that a feather is a feather because it has all the defining characteristics of a feather. You can't presuppose that filaments will evolve eventually into feathers and then identify a filament as a feather. That's not a feather. That's not what a feather is. It defies its natural definition and the way everyone would understand those terms. And all conversation would break down and it would be rendered meaningless and pointless. And so that's the reason why I think this kind of thing is very helpful for Christians, for us to be able to look into to how we should speak to an evolutionist, how we can deal with that, especially when they accuse us of misrepresenting their position all of the time. And so I find this to be very helpful, and I really liked her interview. Dr. Gabriela Haynes is a great person to talk to. I'm glad that she sat there and gave us the extra time. That was very gracious of her. She gave us some extra time. She was sick the previous week and had to cancel. And so she did give us some extra time, and I was really appreciative of that, because in truth, I was a little bit skeptical about doing this in 30 minutes anyhow, because there's just so much that we can go into in depth in this discussion, and I really wanted to go in depth in this subject matter, and I'm so happy that Dr. Haynes gave us that extra time so that we could be able to explore this subject matter further. Let me know, of course, what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, give it a thumbs up. A lot of evolutionists are trying to give videos thumbs down because my videos attract a lot of attention from evolutionists. So please, fellow Christians and young earth creationists, give the video a thumbs up. That helps the video get out to more people. Evolutionists don't want that, so they give it a thumbs down. And because they don't want that video going viral or other people seeing it. So give it a thumbs up so that way that it does get out to more people. And I want as many people to see this as possible, because I think this is going to be very helpful to other young earth creationists, other creationists in general. Maybe it'd be even helpful for the evolutionists, because I think a lot of evolutionists, and I think Dr. Haynes hinted at this as well, a lot of evolutionists aren't even aware. They do it so naturally, they're not even aware that they're redefining these terms. They're redefining what that means when we say things like similarity and feathers and dinosaur and the apes and humans. They don't understand that they're actually blurring those distinctions between those categories. They don't, so a lot of them don't even know that they're even doing it. So I'm hoping that this kind of brings their attention to the mere fact that they are doing it, and they do it all the time. So it isn't because we're misrepresenting their position, it's because they're arguing in a circle and conflating more than one category. Now, what YCs have chosen to do, and I think this is a great thing that they've chosen to do, is like what Gabriela Haynes said, Dr. Haynes said, we do not adopt their cladistic terminology. We do not adopt it. So when we say that evolution would claim that one category turned into another category, that's not a straw man argument. That's not a misrepresentation. What that is that us acknowledging the fact that there's two groups there that are distinct and have distinct natural definitions and terminologies, and you claiming that group and that group shared a common ancestry. And that is clearly what is being stated, what is being argued by the evolutionary community. The fact that the evolutionists think that those two groups are the same group is just their cladistic understanding of their presupposed common ancestry between those two groups. That is the what it really comes down to. And YECs should not and do not adopt their cladistic terminology. We understand that these groups are distinct, and they're sitting there trying to reframe the conversation. One example that I came up with was the idea of turning lead into gold, and all you have to do is redefine the word lead to mean the same thing as gold, and the word gold to mean the same thing as lead, and you no longer have to prove that lead turned into gold, because lead's already gold and gold's already lead. And basically, because you're conflating the distinction between those two categories. Maybe you're looking for something like a superficial similarity, like they're both elements. Both gold and lead is elements. But it takes away from the fact that there's some major differences as well that should be looked at between gold and lead. And obviously, those two groups are distinct from one another, and you cannot redefine lead as gold and redefine gold as lead. It doesn't work that way. And that's what they're doing with birds and dinosaurs. That's what they're doing with humans and apes. And I think that it's wrong, it's circular, it's irrational, and you shouldn't do that. And YEC should never, ever sit there and adopt these cladistic terminology. Do not accept the cladistic terminology and get at the bottom of what they really mean when they argue what they're arguing, because they're using cladistic terminology and they're applying it to the taxonomical system of Linnaeus classification system, which is also has changed over time because of cladistics and that sort of thing. So I hope y'all appreciate this video and this interview. I had a blast. Again, like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you are a new to my channel. I do Christian apologetics, general Christian apologetics. I've been doing a lot of stuff on Genesis lately. I've got an ongoing series. I got 2 ongoing series right now. One is the Genesis series, and the other is the We Apes series, which is you're watching part 2 of that right now. And so I like and enjoy doing these discussions, and I have a lot of interviews on my channel as well. And so I hope you subscribe to my channel and like the videos, and don't forget to share it on the community page, and get this information out. I think that these kinds of discussions are awesome, and it's great, and we need to get the information out to more people. I've met, over the last several weeks, I've met people that I think are new to YEC position, and they're new to YEC position because they just now changed over, or recently they started to change over or look into these things and that sort of thing, and it's great that they're here with us now. And so I think that these kinds of videos, these kinds of resources are really helpful to people, both the people that are not YECs, even if someone really disagrees with us, at least they will be more familiar with what we're trying to argue and what our positions are, hopefully, if they are interested in correctly understanding it. And of course, there are people that actually just uncertain about these things, and then suddenly realize, wow, YEC can hold its own against these kinds of criticisms. Absolutely, all the time, every day. Every second, every minute, it doesn't matter. We are able to hold our own against any of these criticisms, and do. And so that's helpful. It's helpful as a resource to other YECs as well, so that we know how to talk to evolutionists, to know how to respond to these kinds of arguments. So I think it's great that we can have these kinds of discussions, and I will continue to have these on my channel. So until next time, all of you, stay in the know.